Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I am Hari, and I am thrilled to dive into another historical deep dive.
And I am Kini. Today we are traveling back to the 14th century, right into the thick of the 100 Years' War, to discuss the First Treaty of London, also known as the Treaty of Windsor.
It is a fascinating snapshot of a time when kingdoms could be ransomed and treaties were sealed with kisses and exchanged rings. But to truly understand this 1358 treaty, we have to rewind a bit. The conflict actually started over wine, didn't it?
Well, wine and land. Since the Norman conquest of 1066, English monarchs held territories in France, technically making them vassals to the French kings. By the early 1300s, the only major English holdout was Gascony in the southwest.
Gascony was a gold mine. The crown levied a duty on Bordeaux wine that brought in more revenue than all other customs duties combined. So when Philip VI of France confiscated Edward III's lands in 1337, Edward refused to let his favorite vintage go. That sparked the 100 Years' War.
After 10 years of fierce fighting, both sides were financially exhausted. They signed the Truce of Calais in 1347, but then a larger tragedy struck.
The Black Death. Some sources note it actually reached northern France and southern England by 1348, wiping out an estimated one-third of Western Europe's population. In southern England alone, the death rate was over 40%. It's incredibly grim. The sheer scale of loss forced a temporary halt to major battles, though smaller skirmishes continued.
It wasn't until 1355 that full-scale war really resumed. Edward's council realized the treasury was in an unusually favorable financial position, so they decided to launch massive offensives. Edward's eldest son, Edward of Woodstock, famously known by historians as the Black Prince, took command in Gascony. He led these brutal, large-scale mounted raids called chevauchés.
He led 5,000 men deep into southern France, devastating towns with almost no resistance. He repeated this in 1356, leaving a trail of destruction. But this time, the new French king, John II, mustered a massive field army to cut him off.
This leads to the legendary Battle of Poitiers. The French had between 14,000 and 16,000 troops, including 10,000 heavily armored men-at-arms. The Anglo-Gascons were withdrawing, but the French attacked their defensive positions mostly out of honor.
And that honor cost them dearly. The English defeated 4 separate French waves, killed 5,800 Frenchmen, and captured King John II, along with one of his sons and much of his council. Imagine the shock. The King of France is now a prisoner in London. In his absence, France dissolved into absolute chaos. The French Royal Council, most of whom were also captives in England, started negotiating.
And Edward III saw his golden opportunity. By early 1358, they hammered out the First Treaty of London. The terms were staggering. King John's personal ransom was set at 4 million écus. That is roughly 667,000 pounds.
To put that into perspective, that amount was equivalent to the peacetime income of the entire English crown for 20 years. King John wouldn't even be released until a down payment of 600,000 écus was made.
France had to transfer roughly a quarter of its territory to England, mostly in the southwest. In exchange, Edward allegedly agreed to drop his claim to the French throne, though historians note this wouldn't officially happen until a later treaty. They formally sealed it on May 8, 1358 at Windsor Castle, literally sealing it with a kiss.
But friendship doesn't pay the bills. Back in France, the situation was apocalyptic. Raising that much money was virtually impossible.
Absolutely. The Dauphin, John's eldest son Charles, was struggling to hold the country together. Unemployed soldiers, known as routiers, were pillaging the Seine Valley. On top of that, you had a savage peasant uprising called the Jacquerie.
And let's not forget the spectacularly named Charles the Bad, the King of Navarre. He had escaped from a French prison cell, had a strong claim to the throne, and was actively raising an army. He had even murdered the Constable of France in his bedroom a few years prior and bragged about it.
With the Dauphin watching his advisors get murdered in his presence, the government collapsed into insurrection. November 1st passed, and the ransom down payment wasn't delivered.
Edward III was furious. He refused to accept any excuses, declared the treaty lapsed, and prepared to invade again. This actually led to a second Treaty of London in early 1359, which demanded almost half of France.
But that was so harsh, the French government outright repudiated it, so Edward invaded northern France in October 1359.
But here is where we get a really bizarre twist of fate. Edward's army was devastating the region for 6 months, but couldn't take fortified towns. Then, on April 13, 1360, near Chartres, a freak weather event occurred.
A massive hailstorm, accompanied by a sharp drop in temperature, hit the English camp. It killed many soldiers and baggage horses. Edward actually took this as a direct sign from God that he should seek peace.
Talk about divine intervention. That led to the Treaty of Brittany in May 1360. It largely replicated the earlier treaties. Vast areas ceded to the Black Prince, and King John ransomed for a slightly reduced 3 million écus.
16 nobles were released, making it look like the 100 Years' War was over. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. It flared up in 1369 and dragged on until 1453.
Leaving England with only Calais in the end. It is a brilliant example of how even the most heavily negotiated, kingdom-shifting treaties can fall apart due to sheer anarchy and bad weather.
Truly. Thank you for joining us on this incredible medieval journey. Take care out there.
Stay curious. This episode is based on the Wikipedia article, First Treaty of London, which is available under the Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. This podcast was crafted using artificial intelligence.